Hey everyone, I hope you enjoy this. If you do, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Wishing you a great time watching. Hey, Hedge. I never thought I'd be here spilling my guts to strangers on the internet. But honestly, I don't know where else to turn. My name's Alex, and for the last 8 years, I thought I had a rock-solid marriage with my wife, Jessica. We've been through a lot together. Bought a house, raised our 7-year-old son, and shared countless memories. But now, I feel like my whole world is crashing down. It all started about 3 months ago. Jessica had been acting different. She's always been outgoing, but suddenly, she was spending way more time on her phone. She'd laugh at messages she wouldn't show me, saying it was just her group chat with the girls. But even that fell off. Jessica isn't the secretive type. Or at least, she didn't used to be. Then there were the late nights. She started coming home later and later from her job at a marketing firm. Just a big campaign, she'd say, dismissing my concerns with a wave of her hand and that practiced smile of hers. At first, I believed her. We've all had crunch times at work. But then came the makeup. Jessica always took care of herself. But now she was going full glam every single day. I asked her about it once, jokingly, and she snapped at me. What? Can't I want to look nice? Her reaction caught me off guard, but I let it slide. I chalked it up to stress. Still, the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Jessica would never betray me. We were partners, right? But last Thursday, everything changed. And now, I'm sitting here wondering how the hell I'm supposed to move forward. Last Thursday started like any other day. I woke up early, made breakfast for our son, and kissed Jessica goodbye as she rushed out the door, her phone practically glued to her hand. She was meeting a client and wouldn't be home until late. Something about the way she said it. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it made my stomach churn. Around noon, while I was working from home, I got a text from my buddy Ethan. He's been my best friend since college, and someone I've always trusted to have my back. Hey man, I don't know if this means anything, but I thought you should know I saw Jessica at Marlowe's last night. She was with some guy. Didn't look like a work thing. Sorry if I'm overstepping. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Marlowe's is a fancy restaurant downtown. Not exactly the kind of place you go for a casual business meeting. My first instinct was to call Ethan and grill him for details, but I stopped myself. If Jessica really was cheating, I needed more than just suspicions. I needed proof. Later that afternoon, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. Jessica's always been careful about locking it, but she must have slipped up because it was sitting on the kitchen counter unlocked. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the screen. This was a line I didn't want to cross, but the doubt and anxiety were eating me alive. I opened her messages, scrolling past the usual chats with friends and coworkers. That's when I saw it, a thread with someone named Brandon. My heart sank. There were no heart emojis, no over-the-top declarations of love. But the tone of their conversation said everything. Brandon, last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Jessica, me too. I feel alive again when I'm with you. Alive again? What did that even mean? I kept scrolling, my hands shaking. The messages weren't graphic, but they didn't need to be. There was talk of sneaking away, of next time, of how much they missed each other. One message hit me like a freight train. Jessica. Alex would never suspect a thing. He's too busy being a dad to notice. I slammed the phone down, my vision blurring with anger and betrayal. How could she say that? After everything we'd built together, everything we'd been through, how could she treat me like I was some clueless idiot? My head was spinning. I felt like I was going to throw up. For a moment, I thought about confronting her the second she walked through the door that night. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to be smart about this. Jessica wasn't just cheating. She was lying to my face, making a fool out of me. I wasn't about to let her brush this off or spin it into something it wasn't. No, I was going to gather every piece of evidence I could. If she wanted to betray me, fine. But I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative. This was war. After finding those messages, I couldn't just sit there, stewing in my anger. I needed to know more. Who was Brandon? How long had this been going on? And why? Why was she willing to risk everything we had? That night, Jessica came home late, just like she said she would. I tried to act normal, like I hadn't just uncovered the biggest betrayal of my life. She breezed into the house, flashing me a quick smile as she hung her coat by the door. "Long day," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "I'm exhausted." I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Yeah, same here." "How was the meeting?" She poured herself a glass of water, her back to me. "Fine. Just a lot of back and forth about budgets. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I also knew she was lying through her teeth. Watching her move around the kitchen like everything was normal made my stomach churn. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had the full picture. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on her. I started paying attention to her routine, noting every little inconsistency. She'd become so comfortable in her lies that she didn't even notice me watching. Her phone was her constant companion, but I noticed she'd started keeping it locked again, probably a reflex after I snooped. That didn't stop me. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I remembered we had a shared phone plan. With a little digging, I was able to access her call and text logs. That's when I found Brandon's number. I recognized it immediately from the text I'd seen. There were dozens of calls and messages between them, more than any colleague or friend would exchange. I copied the number and saved it. The next day, I called Ethan. I needed someone to talk to, and I knew he'd keep it quiet. When I told him everything, he let out a low whistle. "Man, that's rough," he said. "You think she's still seeing this guy?" "Absolutely," I said. "I need to figure out who he is. Any chance you know someone who could help me run a background check?" Ethan hesitated. "I might." "You sure you want to go down that road? Once you know, you can't unknow." I didn't even need to think about it. "Yeah, Ethan, I need to know who I'm dealing with." He promised to reach out to his contacts, and within a few days, I had Brandon's full name and some basic details. Brandon T. Mid-30s, a regional sales manager for some tech company. Married. 2 kids. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. This guy wasn't just wrecking my family. He had his own to consider. Armed with this information, I started piecing together their pattern. I noticed Jessica was suddenly very eager to run errands on the weekends, and her work meetings seemed to align suspiciously with Brandon's schedule. One Saturday, when she said she was heading out to grab groceries, I decided to follow her. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to see it for myself. She drove across town, way past the nearest store, and pulled into the parking lot of a hotel. My heart sank. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. You know what's coming, but you can't look away. A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled in next to her. Brandon stepped out, all smiles, and greeted her with a hug that lingered just a little too long. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. It took everything in me not to storm over there and confront them on the spot. But instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. They walked inside together, completely unaware I was watching. As much as it killed me, I let them go. I needed to stay calm. I needed to gather everything. Every lie, every betrayal, before I confronted Jessica. This wasn't just about catching her. It was about making sure she couldn't deny or deflect when the time came. I drove home in silence, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me. By the time Jessica returned, carrying a single grocery bag and wearing that same fake smile, I was ready to explode. But I held it together. For now. The storm was coming, and Jessica had no idea that by the time Jessica got home with her single bag of groceries, I had replayed every moment of what I saw in that hotel parking lot at least a dozen times. The way Brandon smiled at her, how she leaned into him like they were the perfect couple, it was seared into my brain. Sitting at the dining table, pretending to go over bills, I watched her walk in like nothing was wrong. "Sorry I took so long," she said, placing the bag on the counter. The store was packed. "Yeah, no worries," I replied, not looking up. My voice was calm, but my blood was boiling underneath. I didn't push her for details. I didn't need to. The proof was in my phone, tucked away in the photos I'd taken of her and Brandon. She started unpacking the groceries, humming a tune like she was in a romantic comedy. It was infuriating. I wanted to shout, to confront her right then and there. But I knew I had to wait. Rushing into it wouldn't just give her an out. It might let her twist the narrative, making herself the victim. No, I needed to be deliberate. The following week, I went all in on gathering evidence. I checked our shared bank account and noticed a few questionable charges. Restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel stays that didn't align with any trip she'd mentioned. She was sloppy, almost like she thought I was too naive to ever look. Her behavior became more erratic. She was working late nearly every night, but when I asked what project was keeping her so busy, she'd get defensive. It's just a client thing, Alex. Do I need to check in with you every second of my day? No, I said, holding her gaze. But it'd be nice to know what's keeping you out so often. You've been distant lately. She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples like I was the one causing her stress. I'm not distant. You're imagining things. Can we not do this right now? I am exhausted. There was gaslighting at its finest. I bit my tongue, swallowing the urge to call her out on her lies. Let her think she was still in control. Let her think I was clueless. One night, when she was asleep, I checked her phone again. This time, she had deleted her messages with Brandon, but she wasn't as thorough as she thought. The call log was still there, late-night conversations lasting over an hour. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself. She could delete all she wanted, but I was one step ahead. Then came the kicker. While rummaging through the junk drawer one evening, I found a receipt from Marlowe's, the same restaurant Ethan had seen her at. It was from 2 weeks ago, the night she'd told me she was at a networking event. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and a handwritten note at the bottom. Can't wait for next time. B. I stared at that receipt, my hands trembling. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the audacity, the sheer arrogance of leaving something like this in our home, assuming I'd never find it. It was like she wanted to be caught, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. The next morning, I called Ethan again. I've got everything I need, I told him. Photos, receipts, call logs. I'm done playing detective. It's time to confront her. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked. Once you open that door, there's no going back. I don't have a choice, I said. She's been lying to my face for months. I can't keep pretending this is normal. That night, as Jessica got ready for another work dinner, I felt the adrenaline start to kick in. My palms were sweaty, my heart racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to lay it all out, piece by piece, and watch her try to explain her way out of it. She thought she had me fooled. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. I waited until she reached for her purse, ready to walk out the door. Jessica, I said, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Jessica froze, her hand hovering over the strap of her purse. She turned to look at me, her face a mix of confusion and annoyance. Alex, I told you I have a dinner. Can this wait? No, I said, standing from the couch. It can't wait. Sit down. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my tone. What's going on? She asked, her voice tinged with a mix of irritation and nervousness. I gestured to the dining table. Sit down, Jessica. We need to have a serious conversation. With a sigh, she set her purse down and reluctantly pulled out a chair, sitting across from me. She crossed her arms, her expression defensive. Okay, what's this about? I sat down, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. I know about Brandon. Her reaction was immediate. A flicker of panic flashed across her face, but she quickly masked it with confusion. Brandon, she said, furrowing her brow. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the photos I'd taken of her and Brandon at the hotel and slid the phone across the table. Care to explain this? Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen, her face going pale. For a moment, she was completely silent, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. Then, she tried to laugh it off, though it sounded forced. Alex, this isn't what it looks like. Not what it looks like, I said, my voice rising. You're meeting another man at a hotel, Jessica. You're hugging him like he's your husband. How exactly am I supposed to interpret that? She stammered, her hands gripping the edge of the table. He's just a friend. We were talking about work. At a hotel? I shot back, my patience wearing thin. Cut the crap, Jessica. I've got more than just photos. I've seen the texts, the call logs, the restaurant receipts. You've been lying to me for months." Her mask of composure crumbled. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I had seen this act before. Jessica could cry on cue when she needed to manipulate a situation. "Alex," she started, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I leaned forward, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Didn't mean for what to happen? To destroy our marriage? To betray me and our son? Or to get caught?" She broke down, her head in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "A mistake?" I scoffed. "Jessica, a mistake is forgetting our anniversary. This was a choice. Repeated choices, over and over again. You lied to me, to our family." She wiped her eyes, looking up at me with a desperate expression. "I was lonely, Alex. You've been so busy with work, with everything else." I felt invisible. Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let her shift the blame onto me. "So, your solution was to sneak around with another man? To blow up our life because you felt invisible? How is that supposed to make anything better?" She didn't answer, just sat there, crying softly. The sight of her, so broken, made a part of me want to reach out and comfort her. But the larger part of me, the part that remembered the months of lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, kept me firmly in my seat. "I want the truth, Jessica," I said, my voice cold. "All of it. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "A few months," she admitted quietly. "We met through work. At first, it was just talking, but then it got out of hand." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Months. Months of her lying, of her sneaking around while I stayed home with our son, oblivious. The anger bubbled up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You need to start packing a bag," I said, my voice steady. "You're leaving tonight." Her head shot up, panic flashing in her eyes. "Alex, please. Don't do this. Let's talk about it, work through it. For our son's sake." I shook my head. "For our son's sake. I can't let him grow up in a home where lies and betrayal are the norm. You've made your choices, Jessica. Now you have to live with them." She tried to argue, but I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'll give you an hour to get your things together," I said, walking out of the room. Behind me, I could hear her crying harder, begging me to reconsider. But I didn't stop. She'd already broken my heart. I wasn't about to let her break my resolve too. Over the next few days, I replayed the confrontation in my head, second-guessing whether I should have pushed harder. Jessica had moved to the guest room, and our conversations were reduced to logistical matters about our son. Every interaction felt like a Cold War, neither of us willing to make the next move. That's when something unexpected happened. I was at the office, drowning in paperwork, when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I answered anyway. "Alex?" a voice asked hesitantly. It was feminine, with a sharp, no-nonsense edge. "Yes, this is Alex." "Who's calling?" "This is Rachel Marks," the voice said, and I froze. Rachel was Jessica's co-worker and, from what I'd gathered over the years, her nemesis. Jessica hated Rachel with a passion, constantly complaining about her cutthroat attitude and how she was always undermining her at work. "I know this is weird," Rachel continued, "but I think we need to talk. It's about Jessica." "What about her?" I asked cautiously. Rachel hesitated for a moment before diving in. "Look, I don't like Jessica, and I'm not going to pretend I do. But there's something going on, and I think you deserve to know about it." I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone tightly. "I'm listening." Rachel explained that she'd overheard Jessica talking to someone on the phone at work. "She's been sneaking around, Alex, taking long lunches, disappearing for hours during the day. Everyone's noticed, but no one wants to say anything because, well, her boss is involved." That last part hit me like a truck. "Her boss?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Yeah, Brandon. He's the regional manager. She's been glued to him ever since he transferred to her branch a few months ago. They act like they're just working closely, but it's more than that. Trust me." My heart sank. Brandon, the name from the texts. The guy I'd seen with her at the hotel. And now her boss. "What's your angle here?" I asked, trying to mask my suspicion. Rachel sighed. "I'm not doing this to help her, if that's what you're asking. I'm doing it because I hate how she's playing everyone at work. And honestly, I think you deserve to know the truth. If you want, I can keep my ears open and let you know if I hear or see anything else." I hesitated. Aligning myself with Rachel felt dirty. She wasn't helping me out of kindness. This was about her grudge against Jessica. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the opportunity. Rachel was in a position to see things I couldn't. "All right," I said finally. "If you find out anything concrete, let me know." "Will do," she said, and then added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry you're in this position. No one deserves this." After we hung up, I sat there staring at my desk. The situation was spiraling out of control. Jessica wasn't just sneaking around behind my back, she was dragging her professional life into it too. And now, her arch-nemesis was my ally. I wasn't sure how to feel about that, but one thing was clear. Rachel's involvement was about to shake things up. That IT was a typical Saturday morning, or at least it started that way. I was tinkering with some repairs in the garage while our son played video games in the living room. Jessica was in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal, when the doorbell rang. I glanced toward the house, expecting a package or maybe one of the neighbors. But when Jessica opened the door, the unmistakable voice of Brandon floated into the air. My hands froze mid-repair, and my stomach twisted. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside to find Brandon standing in the foyer. He was dressed casually, jeans and a polo shirt, but the way he carried himself oozed arrogance. Jessica stood awkwardly beside him, her body language stiff. "Alex," Brandon greeted me with a wide smile, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." I forced myself to shake his hand, even though every fiber of my being wanted to crush it. "Brandon," I said evenly, meeting his gaze. "Didn't realize Jessica's boss made house calls." Jessica jumped in, her voice overly bright. Brandon was just in the area and thought he'd drop off some paperwork for the campaign. "Big campaign," Brandon added smoothly, holding up a thick envelope as if it were the Holy Grail. "Didn't want to risk forgetting it on Monday." "Thoughtful of you," I said, not breaking eye contact. My tone must have conveyed more than I intended, because Brandon's smile faltered for the briefest moment before he recovered. "Well, I don't want to intrude," he said, handing the envelope to Jessica. "Just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for the pitch." Jessica nodded quickly, gripping the envelope like it was a lifeline. "Thanks, Brandon. I'll take a look this weekend." He nodded, offered me a quick, "Nice to meet you," and left without further ceremony. As soon as the door closed, Jessica let out a breath she'd apparently been holding and hurried to the kitchen. I followed her, leaning against the counter as she busied herself with the papers. "What was that about?" I asked. "Work," she replied without looking up, flipping through the documents. "Like I said, on a Saturday? He must be really dedicated to his job." She sighed, finally meeting my gaze. "Alex, it's not a big deal. Can we not overthink this?" I stared at her, wanting to call her out, but I bit my tongue. Brandon's unexpected visit wasn't just about paperwork. I was sure of it. But for now, I let it slide. There would be other opportunities to press her, and when the time came, I'd have more than suspicion on my side. The days following Brandon's visit were tense, like a storm hovering just beyond the horizon. Jessica seemed on edge, avoiding eye contact and burying herself in work. I didn't push her too hard, but I could tell she knew I was watching her closely. Then came Friday night. I was in the living room, helping our son with a school project when Jessica walked in, looking unusually dressed up for someone who claimed to be heading to a team dinner. Her black dress was sleek and flattering, paired with heels that she hadn't worn in months. "You look nice," I said casually, though my tone carried a hint of challenge. Jessica smiled tightly. "It's just a dinner with the team. Brandon wants everyone to celebrate the progress we've made on the campaign." Brandon again. His name had become like nails on a chalkboard to me. "Oh, so Brandon's organizing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah," she replied quickly. "He's just really focused on team morale right now." "Must be one hell of a boss," I said, not hiding the sarcasm. Jessica bristled, but didn't respond. She kissed our son goodbye and left before I could ask any more questions. As soon as the door closed, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. She's heading out, isn't she? Rachel's voice was sharp, almost amused. How do you know that? I asked, my heart starting to race. Because Brandon just sent an email to everyone saying he's leaving the office early. Let me guess. Jessica told you it was a team dinner? I clenched my jaw. Exactly. Rachel sighed. She's not the first person he's pulled this with, Alex. Brandon has a reputation. He's been caught getting too close to employees before, but he's always managed to keep it quiet. The company sweeps it under the rug because his numbers are good. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I wasn't sure it was still happening, Rachel admitted. But now? I'm sure. Look, if you want proof, I can keep digging. I've got a friend who works in corporate who might have access to Brandon's travel records. It could help you piece together where he's been meeting Jessica. I hesitated. I didn't like the idea of getting deeper into this web, but Rachel's information was too valuable to ignore. All right, I said finally. Keep me posted. After we hung up, I paced the living room, my mind racing. Jessica wasn't just lying. She was entangled in something messy, something dangerous. I had hoped I could confront her before things spiraled further, but now it felt like I was being dragged into a game I hadn't agreed to play. Hours later, Jessica returned home. She looked startled to see me waiting for her in the living room, still awake. You're up late, she said, setting her purse down. Couldn't sleep, I replied. How was the dinner? It was fine, she said, avoiding my eyes. Just a lot of work talk. I studied her for a moment, my anger bubbling beneath the surface. But I kept my expression neutral. Glad it went well. She gave me a faint smile and excused herself to bed. As I watched her disappear down the hallway, I realized I couldn't wait much longer. Jessica's lies were unraveling, and sooner or later, she was going to trip over them. The question was, would I be ready when she did? The next morning, I woke up to a text from Rachel. Call me, Acid. I found something. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Jessica, and stepped onto the back porch with my phone. The cool morning air did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. What is it? I asked the second Rachel picked up. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice tinged with urgency. I had my friend check Brandon's travel records. He's been booking hotel rooms under the company's corporate account. 2 locations that match Jessica's supposed work trips from last month. My stomach churned. You're sure about this? Positive, Rachel said. The dates line up perfectly. And here's the kicker. Brandon charged a dinner for 2 to the room in one of those stays. Wine, steak, the works. Definitely not a solo meal. I gritted my teeth, the pieces falling into place. Jessica had been adamant about those work trips, brushing off my concerns with that practiced, dismissive tone of hers. Rachel, I said, my voice low, you've done more than enough. I owe you one. You don't owe me anything, she replied. But if you want my advice, don't let this drag out. The longer you wait, the messier it'll get. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, staring out at the yard. My thoughts were a tangled mess. The confirmation I'd been waiting for felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or both. That I decided to test the waters with Jessica, to see how far she'd go to keep up the charade. Over breakfast, I casually mentioned, I was thinking about taking a week off work next month. Maybe we could do a family trip. Get out of town for a bit. Jessica barely looked up from her coffee. Next month? I don't know if that'll work. The team's really busy right now, and Brandon might have us traveling again soon. Her mention of Brandon was like a slap to the face. I forced myself to stay calm, nodding as if her words hadn't just confirmed everything Rachel had told me. Fair enough, I said. Let me know your schedule. She gave me a distracted smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. That afternoon, I took our son to the park to clear my head. As he played on the swings, I couldn't help but replay every interaction I'd had with Jessica over the past few months, every lie she'd fed me. Alex, I turned to see Claire, one of Jessica's co-workers, standing a few feet away. We weren't close, but I'd met her at a couple of company events. She looked hesitant, almost nervous. Hey, Claire, I said, trying to sound normal. What's up? She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. Look, I don't want to get involved in something that's not my business, but I've noticed some things at work. About Jessica and Brandon. My chest tightened. What kind of things? They're close, she said carefully. Like unusually close. People have been talking, and I thought you should know. I nodded, swallowing hard. Thanks, Claire. I appreciate it. She gave me an apologetic look before walking away. As I watched my son laugh and play, my heart felt heavy. The walls were closing in on Jessica's lies, and more people were starting to notice. But the question remained. How much longer could I let this go on before it destroyed everything? The noose was tightening, and soon there would be no escape. That'd be why now. I wasn't just suspicious. I was certain. Jessica and Brandon's behavior, the mounting evidence from Rachel, and even the whispers from Claire painted a picture that I couldn't ignore. But confronting Jessica again without undeniable proof still felt risky. If she could find a way to wriggle out of it, she would. I needed to force her hand. That evening, as Jessica sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I casually mentioned, "Hey, I was thinking about coming to your office next week. I've got some free time, and it might be nice to grab lunch with you and meet some of your coworkers. You know, put some faces to the names I keep hearing." Jessica froze, her smile faltering for a split second before she recovered. "Oh, that's sweet, but next week might not be great. We got a lot of client meetings, and I don't think I'll have much downtime." "Client meetings?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "I thought you said the big campaign was wrapping up." She hesitated, clearly scrambling for an excuse. "It is, but there's a follow-up project we're starting soon. You know how these things go. Always something new popping up." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but inside, my suspicions solidified. Her nervousness spoke volumes. The next day, Rachel called me again, this time with a bold suggestion. "If you really want to catch them, you need to see it for yourself," she said. "What are you suggesting?" I asked warily. "There's a company happy hour next Thursday at Blackbird Lounge. It's not mandatory, but Brandon and Jessica never miss these things. If you show up unannounced, you might get a glimpse of how they really act around each other." I hesitated. The idea of walking into Jessica's professional world felt intrusive, but Rachel had a point. They'd be less guarded in a public setting where they thought no one was watching. "All right," I said finally. "But if I do this, it's just to observe. No confrontation. Not yet." Rachel agreed, and we hung up. Thursday rolled around, and I parked a few blocks away from Blackbird Lounge. My heart raced as I approached the bar, unsure of what I was walking into. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing, that Rachel was wrong, and this would all be some huge misunderstanding. But when I stepped inside, my hope evaporated. The room was crowded, filled with Jessica's co-workers laughing and mingling. And there, in the corner, was Jessica, sitting far too close to Brandon. Her posture was relaxed, her laugh too familiar. Brandon leaned in, his hand resting casually on the back of her chair. They looked like a couple. I positioned myself at the bar, ordering a drink and keeping my distance. Watching them was like watching strangers. This wasn't the Jessica I knew, the woman I'd built a life with. She was smiling, flirting, acting like she didn't have a husband or a child waiting at home. Rachel appeared at my side, her expression grim. "Told you," she said quietly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thanks, Rachel." We stayed there for a while, watching as Jessica and Brandon's behavior grew bolder. At one point, he whispered something in her ear, and she laughed, resting her hand briefly on his arm. It was enough to make my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. By the time they left together, I had seen enough. That night, Jessica came home late, her cheeks flushed from what she no doubt thought was an exhilarating evening. I was sitting at the dining table, waiting for her. "Hey," she said, surprised. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied evenly. "Thought I'd wait up and see how your happy hour went." Her smile faltered. "Oh, it was fine. Just the usual work stuff. Nothing exciting." I nodded, holding her gaze. Glad to hear it. For now, I let her walk away, clueless that I had been there, watching her. The confrontation could wait. The trap was set, and when it finally sprung, there would be no way for her to escape. The morning after the happy hour, I felt the weight of what I'd seen bearing down on me. Jessica's betrayal wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was undeniable. But I still needed more. If I was going to confront her for good, I wanted there to be no way for her to twist the story or deflect blame. That's when Rachel sent me a bombshell text. "We need to meet. I found something huge." I texted back, arranging to meet her at a coffee shop near her office during her lunch break. When I arrived, Rachel was already waiting, a folder sitting on the table in front of her. "This," she said, sliding the folder toward me, "is everything you need." Inside was a collection of documents, expense reports, travel itineraries, and photos that Rachel had managed to dig up with the help of her contact in corporate. The photos were the hardest to look at. There was Jessica and Brandon, sitting side by side in a booth at a restaurant, leaning in close like they didn't have a care in the world. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel smirked. "Let's just say corporate isn't as secure as they think. And Brandon's been sloppy. He's been using the company account for personal expenses, including dinners and hotel stays. He's not just screwing around with Jessica, he's screwing over the company too." The anger bubbled up again, hot and furious. "He's that arrogant?" "Arrogant doesn't even begin to cover it," Rachel said. "The guy thinks he's untouchable." I flipped through the papers, each one adding to the pile of evidence against Jessica and Brandon. It was more than enough to confront her, but Rachel wasn't done. "I saved the best for last," she said, pulling out her phone. She played an audio recording, and my blood ran cold. It was Jessica's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Brandon, we have to be careful. Alex is starting to ask questions. I don't think he knows yet, but I can feel him watching me." Brandon's reply was calm, even smug. "Relax. Even if he suspects something, what's he going to do? He doesn't have proof." The casual way they dismissed me, like I was nothing more than an obstacle in their way, was like a dagger to the heart. That night, I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the folder on the passenger seat. I had everything I needed, proof of the affair, their arrogance, their betrayal. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt hollow. This wasn't just about catching Jessica. It was about deciding what to do next. Did I confront her now, end it all in one explosive moment? Or did I wait, gather even more, and make sure there was no escape for either of them? The decision weighed heavily on me as I walked inside. Jessica was in the living room, her legs tucked under her on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. "How was your day?" she asked casually, not even looking up. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "Just work?" She nodded, offering a distracted smile. The sight of her sitting there, so comfortable in her lies, made my stomach turn. But I kept my cool. The time for confrontation was close, but it wasn't tonight. Instead, I headed to the bedroom, locking the folder in a drawer and sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was tired of the lies, the games, the double life she was leading. The trap was almost ready, and when it finally snapped shut, Jessica and Brandon wouldn't see it coming. The next few days were unbearable. Jessica carried on with her usual routine, blissfully unaware of how close I was to unraveling everything. I played my role as the clueless husband, biting back the anger every time she smiled at me or made small talk like we were a normal couple. Rachel, meanwhile, kept me updated. She'd managed to get her hands on even more incriminating details about Brandon. Expense records tied to Jessica, including a weekend getaway that Jessica had claimed was a team-building retreat. The arrogance of their carelessness was infuriating. Then, something unexpected happened. I was picking up our son from school when Claire, Jessica's co-worker, the one who'd warned me at the park, approached me in the parking lot. She looked hesitant but determined. "Alex," she said softly, "I didn't want to bother you again, but I overheard something today. I think you need to know." I glanced at my son, who was happily climbing into the car, before turning back to Claire. "What is it?" Jessica was talking to Brandon in his office. I was passing by and couldn't help but hear her say she needed more time to figure things out with you. She sounded nervous, like she thought you were catching on. I nodded, my suspicions solidifying. "Thanks, Claire. I appreciate it." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, Alex, you deserve better than this. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." Her words stayed with me as I drove home. Jessica wasn't just lying to me. She was scrambling, trying to keep her world from falling apart. That evening, Jessica came home later than usual, citing last-minute work stuff. She was distracted, barely making eye contact as she made her way to the kitchen. "What's going on?" I asked, leaning against the counter as she rummaged through the fridge. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just a long day." Her avoidance was almost laughable at this point. "Long day with Brandon?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Jessica froze, her hand hovering over a bottle of water. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You tell me," I said, folding my arms. "You've been spending a lot of time with him lately. More than just work, wouldn't you say?" Her eyes narrowed, defensive. "Alex, you're being ridiculous. He's my boss. Of course I spend time with him. It's part of my job." "Right," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I suppose those team-building retreats and happy hours are just part of the job too?" Jessica's face flushed with anger. "I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not going to stand here and let you accuse me of something I haven't done." I held her gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm not accusing you of anything yet. But let me make one thing clear, Jessica. I'm not blind, and I'm not stupid. You might want to start thinking very carefully about your next move." She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before grabbing her water and storming out of the room. Later that night, Rachel sent me one last message. "Brandon has a meeting tomorrow at the Marriott downtown. Jessica's name isn't on the official schedule, but I overheard her telling someone she'd be out of the office all afternoon. Thought you'd want to know." It was the break I'd been waiting for. This wasn't just another coincidence. This was my chance to catch them in the act. The next day, I called in sick to work and headed to the Marriott. Parking across the street, I waited, my nerves fraying with each passing minute. Sure enough, around 1 p.m., Jessica's car pulled into the lot. I watched as she got out, dressed sharply in a fitted blazer and heels, and walked inside. Less than 10 minutes later, Brandon arrived, his smug grin visible even from a distance. He followed Jessica into the hotel without a second thought. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was it, the final straw. I grabbed my phone, snapped a photo of them entering the hotel together, and took a deep breath. The confrontation was coming, and there was no turning back now. Sitting in my car, watching Jessica and Brandon disappear into the Marriott, a storm of emotions surged through me. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak. But this time, there was clarity too. I wasn't going to let her keep spinning her web of lies. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter how ugly. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the photos and evidence I collected over the past weeks. The pictures of Jessica and Brandon at the happy hour, the receipts Rachel had provided, the audio of them mocking my supposed ignorance. I had everything I needed. I wasn't just walking into that hotel to confront them. I was walking in armed with the truth. The lobby was polished and quiet, the faint hum of classical music playing in the background. My heart pounded as I approached the front desk. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm meeting my wife here." She said she was in one of the conference rooms, but didn't tell me which one. "Could you help me out?" The receptionist gave me a polite smile. "Of course. What's her name?" "Jessica Barnes." She tapped a few keys on her computer, then said, "She's in the Magnolia room on the second floor. Would you like me to call her for you?" "That won't be necessary," I replied, forcing a smile. I took the elevator to the second floor, the walls seeming to close in around me as it ascended. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway, where a small plaque pointed toward the Magnolia room. The closer I got, the clearer their voices became. I stood outside the conference room, the door slightly ajar. Their laughter filtered through, followed by Brandon's unmistakable voice. "Don't worry," he said. "By the time Alex figures anything out, it'll be too late. We'll have everything sorted." Jessica's laugh was soft, almost nervous. "I just feel like I'm walking on eggshells. He's been acting different lately, like he knows something." "He doesn't know anything," Brandon said dismissively. "Guys like him don't want to believe their wives could be unfaithful. They just bury their heads in the sand." I clenched my fists, my body trembling with anger. Without thinking, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The look on their faces when they saw me was priceless. Jessica's mouth fell open, her face going pale. Brandon froze, his smug grin vanishing as he leaned back in his chair. "Alex, Jessica stammered, standing up. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice cold and even. I held up my phone, showing them the photo I'd taken of them entering the hotel together. "Care to explain this?" Jessica's eyes darted to Brandon, who cleared his throat and tried to regain his composure. "This isn't what it looks like," he began. "Oh, save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "I've got photos, receipts, audio recordings. Don't insult me by pretending this is innocent." Jessica's facade crumbled, her eyes filling with tears. "Alex, No," I said sharply, holding up a hand to stop her. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, glancing at Brandon again, but I wasn't letting her off the hook. "Look at me, Jessica," I demanded. "How long?" Her voice was barely a whisper. 6 months. The weight of her admission hit me like a freight train. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around, of treating me like a fool. I turned to Brandon, my anger boiling over. "And you," I said, my voice shaking. "You thought you could just waltz into my life, destroy my marriage, and walk away unscathed?" Brandon raised his hands defensively. "Look, Alex, this isn't personal." "Not personal?" I barked, stepping closer. "You've been screwing my wife and lying to your company. Trust me, Brandon, this is very personal." Jessica started crying, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not this time did I turn to Jessica, my voice quieter but no less firm. "I hope he's worth it because you've destroyed everything we built together. You lied to me, to our son. There's no coming back from this." "Alex, please," she sobbed. "Let me explain." "I don't need explanations," I said, cutting her off. "I need honesty, and you've proven you're incapable of that." Without another word, I walked out, leaving them both standing there. My chest felt heavy, but for the first time in weeks, my mind was clear. The truth was out, and there was no going back. That I sat in my car, my heart pounding as I watched Jessica and Brandon disappear into the hotel. My mind raced with everything I'd uncovered. The photos, the recordings, the whispers from coworkers. It was all leading to this moment. I pulled up Rachel's number and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "They're inside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Rachel asked. "I don't have a choice," I replied. "It's time." I hung up and stepped out of the car. My legs felt like lead as I crossed the parking lot and entered the hotel. The lobby was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of guests checking in. I approached the front desk, plastering on my best polite smile. "Hi," I said, leaning in slightly. "I'm supposed to meet someone here, but I'm running late. Could you tell me which room Brandon T. is in?" The clerk hesitated, glancing at the computer. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out that information." I nodded, expecting as much. "Of course. It's just that I forgot my phone in their room earlier, and I'm trying to grab it before they check out. Maybe you could give them a call to let them know I'm here?" The clerk seemed to weigh my explanation before picking up the phone. Moments later, she looked up and said, "Room 714. I thanked her, my stomach churning as I made my way to the elevator. Each floor felt like an eternity as I ascended. When the elevator dinged and the door slid open, I stepped out, scanning the numbers until I found 714. I stood there for a moment, my fist hovering in front of the door. Part of me wanted to walk away, to delay the confrontation just a little longer. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I knocked. The door opened slightly, and there was Jessica, her expression morphing from surprise to panic in an instant. "Alex," she stammered, her face pale. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "This isn't a good time." I didn't wait for her to finish. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Brandon was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, his confident demeanor faltering when he saw me. "Alex," he began, standing up, "this isn't what it looks like." I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "Save it, Brandon. I've been piecing this together for months." I turned to Jessica. "You lied to me. You lied to our son. And for what?" I pointed at Brandon, my voice shaking with anger. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked cornered, like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking. "I gave you everything, And this is how you repay me? Sneaking around behind my back, throwing away our life for this? Alex, she said finally, her voice trembling. I can explain. Explain? I shouted, the anger spilling over. You've been lying to me for months, Jessica. There's nothing left to explain. Brandon stepped forward, trying to insert himself into the conversation. Look, man, this isn't entirely her fault. I turned on him, my fury laser-focused. Don't you dare try to play the noble guy here. You've been using her just like you've used your position to exploit who knows how many others. You're a joke. The room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on all of us. Finally, I looked back at Jessica. You know what the saddest part of this is? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed us. You betrayed our son. Jessica's tears flowed freely now, but I felt nothing but emptiness. I turned and walked out, leaving them both standing there in the wreckage of their choices. The storm had hit, and there was no going back. Walking out of that hotel room felt like stepping into a different reality. The air outside was cold, but I barely felt it. My mind raced as I got into my car and sat there, staring at the steering wheel. Everything I'd built, everything I thought I knew was gone. I drove aimlessly for a while, unsure of where to go. Home? That didn't feel like home anymore. I ended up parking in front of Ethan's house. He was the only person I could think of who'd understand. When I knocked, Ethan opened the door, immediately sensing something was wrong. Alex? What's going on? I stepped inside, collapsing onto his couch. She's been cheating, I said flatly. His face darkened. Jessica? With her boss, Brandon, I confirmed, my voice hollow. I caught them together, at a hotel. Ethan sat down next to me, his hand on my shoulder. Man, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. For the next hour, I poured everything out. Rachel's involvement, the evidence I collected, the confrontation at the hotel. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression a mix of anger and sympathy. What are you going to do now? He asked when I finally stopped talking. I don't know, I admitted. Divorce is the obvious answer, but what about our son? How do I explain this to him without breaking his heart? Ethan nodded slowly. It's not going to be easy, but he deserves the truth, at least in a way he can understand. You can't let Jessica twist the story. When I finally went home, Jessica was waiting for me. She looked a mess, her makeup smudged, her eyes red from crying. Alex, she started, her voice hoarse. Please, we need to talk. I raised a hand to stop her. I don't want to hear it, Jessica. Not tonight. She flinched, but I didn't care. I walked past her, heading straight to the guest room where I'd been sleeping for the past few nights. The next morning, I found Jessica in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. I called Brandon this morning, she said softly. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, did you two have a lovely chat? Her face twisted in pain. I ended it, Alex. With him. It's over. I laughed bitterly. You think that fixes this? You think breaking it off with him makes everything okay? No, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I know it doesn't, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, to fix us. There is no us, Jessica, I said coldly. Not anymore. You made sure that the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. She sobbed harder, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I couldn't. Later that day, I met with a lawyer. I didn't want to drag this out, but I also wanted to make sure my son and I were protected. The lawyer was empathetic but firm, walking me through the steps of filing for divorce. You're in a strong position, she said, especially with the evidence you've gathered. But this is going to be messy, especially if custody becomes an issue. Custody. The thought of Jessica fighting for our son made my stomach churn. She'd been a good mother, at least until now. But could I trust her judgment after everything she'd done? For now, I decided to focus on what I could control, making sure my son felt safe and loved, no matter what happened between Jessica and me. That evening, I sat down with our son to have the hardest conversation of my life. Hey, buddy, I said, sitting beside him on the couch. There's something we need to talk about. He looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. What is it, Dad? I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't fix. Your mom and we've been having some of those problems. Are you mad at each other? He asked, his voice small. I nodded. A little, but no matter what, we both love you very much. That's never going to change. He seemed to accept that for now, but I knew this was just the beginning of the questions he'd have in the future. As I tucked him into bed later that night, I kissed his forehead and whispered, I'll always be here for you, no matter what. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of peace. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. The road ahead was long, but I was ready to face it. The house felt quieter than ever. Jessica kept her distance, hovering in the periphery of my life like a shadow. She'd moved into the guest room officially, no longer pretending things could return to normal. Every interaction between us was tense, every word loaded with unspoken resentment and pain. The next steps weren't just about ending a marriage. They were about dismantling a life we'd built together. The MY lawyer, Dana, was sharp and efficient. She'd already filed the paperwork, and now we were preparing for the next phase, negotiations. Jessica's reaction to the divorce filing was a mix of shock and desperation. You're really going through with this? She asked one morning, her voice shaking. Yes, I replied firmly. I can't live like this anymore. Her tears came, as they often did now, but I couldn't let myself be swayed. This wasn't just about me. It was about our son, about giving him a stable environment free from lies and betrayal. Jessica tried to argue for reconciliation, suggesting therapy and time apart to heal. But the words felt hollow, like she was grasping at straws. The damage was done, and no amount of counseling could undo it. That a few days later, Rachel called with an update that left me stunned. Brandon's been fired, she said bluntly. What? I asked, caught off guard. Corporate got wind of his little extracurricular activities, Rachel explained. Apparently, someone tipped them off about his inappropriate relationships with employees and misuse of company funds. He's out, and they're investigating further. I couldn't help but smirk. You wouldn't happen to know who tipped them off, would you? Rachel's laugh was cold. Let's just say karma works fast when you give it a little push. Hearing that Brandon's professional life was falling apart felt like a small victory, but it didn't erase the damage he and Jessica had caused. Still, knowing he wouldn't be in her orbit anymore brought a strange sense of closure. The night after I told Jessica about the divorce filing, she finally broke down. It wasn't the dramatic outburst I'd expected. It was quiet, raw, almost pitiful. Alex, she said, standing in the doorway of the guest room. Can we talk? I nodded reluctantly, sitting down at the dining table. She joined me, her hands trembling as she held a mug of tea. I know I've ruined everything, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. I got lost. Her words should have meant something, but they didn't. Not anymore. Lost? I echoed, my tone bitter. You didn't get lost, Jessica. You made choices, deliberate, calculated choices. And those choices destroyed our family. She flinched but didn't argue. I know, she said quietly, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm asking, begging, you to at least consider what this will do to our son. Please, Alex, don't let this end in hate. Her plea caught me off guard. For the first time in weeks, her words felt genuine. I didn't forgive her, and I knew I never would, but I realized that holding on to my anger wasn't going to help anyone, especially not our son. I don't hate you, Jessica, I said finally, my voice calm, but I can't live with you anymore. And I won't pretend everything's fine just to keep up appearances for our son. He deserves honesty, even if it's painful. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Jessica and I worked out a custody arrangement that prioritized our son's well-being. She moved into an apartment nearby, and while the initial transition was rocky, we both made an effort to keep things civil for his sake. Rachel and I stayed in touch, though I began to distance myself as the dust settled. She'd been instrumental in uncovering the truth, but now that the battle was over, I needed space to focus on rebuilding my life. One evening, after dropping my son off at Jessica's new place, I found myself sitting on my front porch, staring at the sunset. The house felt emptier without him there, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel suffocated by it. Life wasn't perfect, and the scars of Jessica's betrayal would always be there. But I'd survived. I'd stood up for myself and protected my son. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could rebuild, rediscover, and eventually maybe even find happiness again.